Thank you, Sena. Thank you for inviting me to this important event in Turkey at this important moment of its time. As I oversee the work of International PEN's Global Campaign for Freedom of Expression and have a special focus on Europe and on Turkey. And I'll be talking about the existence of insult laws in Western Europe. Ever since the introduction of Article 301 into the Turkish Penal Code in June 2005, and indeed before as it was being debated for introduction, International PEN had been campaigning towards its repeal. In the past few months, and most recently during a speech made by President Erdogan to the annual meeting of the International Press Institute here in Istanbul last week, the Turkish government had pointed to the existence of similar laws against insult in state countries in the European Union, insult to the state in countries in the European Union. And I'd like to take this opportunity to respond. The definition of insult or offence is notoriously difficult to formulate and therefore to prosecute. There are no objective standards. The difference between an opinion and an insult is subjective. The notion of insult is so broad in its interpretation, it is impossible to legislate. By being so vague and imprecise, insult laws penalising acts such as offending the honour or the dignity of a person, a nation, public or government institution, a monarch, an emblem, or other symbol of the state, become the useful vehicle for those in power to seek or quell dissent and criticism. As I mentioned, for some months now, the Turkish Ministry of Justice, and more lately President Erdogan, have made comments referring to countries in the EU that have insult laws in their statute books. So how could people in these countries complain about Turkey when they themselves hold similar laws? As a result, PEN began to get questions from people within Turkey and outside. Is this true? As PEN had coincidentally launched a campaign against criminal defamation and insult laws, it felt duty-bound not to ignore this claim and to see if indeed it was true. The first task was to find out whether there had been any other similar study, and indeed there had. In 2000, the World Press Freedom Committee in the USA have published a hefty book, some 300 pages, with a global survey of insult and blasphemy laws, to which they had coincidentally issued an update last year. From this, we selected the sections relevant to the European Union. We then checked for any updates and whether there had been any successful prosecutions, more importantly. What we found is there are indeed a number of EU states that have laws which make it a crime to insult the state or its institutions, its monarchies, and its leaders, but they are very rarely, if ever, used. Germany, Poland, and the Netherlands have been singled out by the Turkish officials. Of these, Poland is indeed problematic. Its penal code makes it an offence to insult the Polish nation, the president, foreign and public officials, and has been applied fairly regularly. However, courts have been reluctant to pass custodial sentences and apply only fines. In Germany, defamation of the president is an offence, as is insult to the Federal Republic, its states, the flag, and the national anthem. However, the Federal Constitutional Court in 2000 notably stated that even harsh political criticism, however unjust, however unobjective, does not constitute insult of the Republic. Therefore, there have been no recent prosecutions. In the Netherlands, it is a crime to intentionally insult the king and certain members of the royal family. Again, the most recent insult convictions, though, were as long ago as the 1960s. The Turkish Ministry of Justice has referred to over 120 cases taken in the Netherlands, insult cases. We believe this is reference to the application of civil defamation suits used by public officials, a practice that we consider inappropriate, but nevertheless they do not result in imprisonment. Other countries where there exist insult laws include France, where the 1881 press law makes it an offence to insult the president, courts, armed forces and other public bodies. However, in 2000 this law was amended to remove the option of imprisonment. But again, there have been no successful prosecution in recent years. Similarly, Italian law have provisions that make it an offence to insult the Republic, the armed forces, and indeed the Italian nation. But there had been no successful prosecution, this time since the 50s. Similarly, in Belgium, Spain, and Portugal, there are laws that make it an offence to insult officials and members of their respective royal families. But these have not been enforced. It is interesting to note that among the newer members of the EU, all formerly part of the Soviet bloc, there have been moved to abolish the concept of insult and defamation to the state and its officials. In 1994, Hungary abolished these laws. In Romania, in 2006, attempts to decriminalise insult, its existing laws include the crime of defamation of country and the nation, were overruled earlier this year by its constitutional court, but we're hoping this will be redressed next year in 2008. Again, in the mid-90s, changes to the Czech penal code removed crimes of insult to the parliament and to the president. Although there does remain the crime to insult to the state institution, like elsewhere, there have been no recent prosecutions. From this, it can be concluded that, indeed, the Turkish Ministry of Justice, to a certain degree, is correct. There do exist in the EU laws that make it an offence to insult the state, but only in 3 countries, and there have been no successful prosecutions. In other countries, insult laws relate specifically to insult to heads of states and institutions, and monarchies, again, are rarely, if ever, enforced. It can be said that nowhere in Europe are they applied with the same enthusiasm and rigour as they are in Turkey. But this does not mean that we in the EU can be complacent. Post 9/11, there is an increasing debate in Europe around multiculturalism, which has focused attention on insult laws. Even where these laws are not actually enforced, they remain a silent threat and can be particularly problematic at testing times such as these. As a result of our investigation, we will be advising PEN members, writers in all countries where insult laws exist, be it in Turkey, in the European Union and elsewhere, to recognise the threat they pose to free expression and demand their repeal. Thank you.